The Writer's Lighthouse at Ship presents Reflections on Imagery, the Five Senses, and Show, Don't Tell. Your most important tools as a writer are your five senses. Everything you know about life, from your religious and political views, to what music you like, to how you really feel about your family and friends. All of it began with something you saw, or something you heard, or something that you tasted, or even something that maybe you touched, or perhaps smelled. While it's true we may experience reality in our minds, all that starts with the raw data supplied by the body through our five senses. We learn to filter out so much, we don't even realize that we're flooded with thousands of images every second. Being more aware of this, slowing down, focusing on minute sensual detail, this is invaluable for someone who wants to write well. I know that when we hear the word image, we're prone to think of the purely visual, but I need you to expand that definition. When I say image, I mean any nugget of sensory information. Here are some images from the back porch where I'm currently composing this. Through my window, I can see a squirrel's twitching tail. At my side is a cup of coffee. I can taste the bitterness of the coffee, and I can feel the heat of the cup on my lip. I can hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, and I can see sunlight streaming through the branches of the trees outside. I can smell bacon wafting in from the kitchen, and if I focus, I can hear the distant hum of traffic upon the highway. Simply put, sensory images create our perception of reality. Sometimes, as you may have noticed, a single image actually activates several senses. When that highway came up, you could see the cars, you could hear the roar of their engines, and maybe even smell that exhaust. And with the bacon, well, I'm sure you could imagine the taste. Didn't you hear it sizzling too? And this is why, with a sentence like, "Fred bit into a juicy apple," you might be prompted to feel the sensation on your teeth, to imagine a splash of juice arcing through the air, to taste the sweet tang that comes from a good apple, and to hear that satisfying crunch.
Vivid imagery transfers sensory experience from the mind of the writer to the mind of the reader. It puts us all on the same page, if you will. So, generic terms like patriotism or faith, these don't really qualify as images because that transfer is broken up. I know you might picture something for each of these terms, but to be fair, you generated that image, right? Not me. I mean, if I asked everyone in your class right now what they were picturing for faith, we'd all have different images, so there's no real connection. But look what happens when I start tightening the imagery. As you read these, I'd argue that you're seeing, to a higher degree, what I am seeing. Frankly, a good image penetrates your mind. When you read an American flag, you couldn't help but picture it. Look what happens when I go to faith. Now each of these, again, I'm moving what's in my head into your mind through your senses. If your goal as a writer is to create an imaginary world in the reader's mind, it follows the best way to do that is by activating or even manipulating their senses. This is the essence of the principle, show, don't tell. This is important enough to dig into a little bit deeper. Some other ways to think of it are to trust images over abstractions, and to rely on the five senses over the five sins of generalization, summary, analysis, interpretation, and explanation. Those are all useful tools in all sorts of writing, even in storytelling, but when it matters most that the reader's with you, that's when you want to show, not tell. Here's a broader example of abstraction to specific image. At the word vacation, everyone pictures something different probably, based on their background. I can tune that a little bit if I move to something like amusement park. Now we're all picturing something, but it's still kind of hazy. Sharper still, though, and this is when I think we're at the level of image, is Ferris wheel. Now enough I can say we're on the same page. And I accept that in that room there could be red Ferris wheels or white Ferris wheels. That's fine. We'll quibble later. But for now, we're having some kind of shared experience. My advice then, as you try and create imagery, is to guide the reader. Don't spoon feed them. To offer concrete evidence of the impression you're trying to make, not just to jump to the conclusion. To prove the impression, not to explain it. Our minds interpret sensory information, and from that, they produce abstractions like patriotism or faith. This allows higher level thinking, and that's great and important. I mean, it's what I'm doing right now as I write and as I talk to you. But when you're trying to share a story, it's important to understand that if you rely only on abstractions or explanations, your readers are likely to wander away from the authentic experience you'd like them to have. Even worse, they might grasp the intellectual understanding, but not feel the emotional wallop. So when you read Jane was cruel, you don't doubt she was cruel any more than you doubt her name was Jane. But do you really feel it? You don't, because I'm just telling you. But when I show you, well, something else happens altogether. Now, as you read that sentence, most people would think she's kind of a jerk, and they'd be right. Consider the opening line of a poem that reads, "When I'm in nature, I forget my problems." This is a great truth for many, but to be fair, it's pretty common, and I'd argue that these words are unlikely to invite readers into a unique experience because they rely so heavily on telling an abstraction. The two vague terms here, nature and problems, allow too much interpretation for the reader. We're just not sharing an experience. So compare that with this. Walking barefoot on the beach, I feel far from the F in red ink on my English paper. My father's silent stare over the dinner table. The 3 a.m. text I got from my girlfriend. Look, that's not Shakespeare, okay? I get it. And I accept that your brain still needs to process these images, make suppositions, draw conclusions. But the language is exerting more influence now. Originally, instead of that second line, I had math homework, which I thought might conjure textbooks, calculators, fractured pencils. But that gave too much leeway for me, so I tightened the image. Here's a more clearly narrative example. Ted came into the living room, clearly very angry. He asked a provocative question about the nature of his relationship with Marcia, who seemed disinterested. God, that's terrible. In these two sentences, I'm relying entirely on telling, once again. Because of that, there's just very little sensory information for your brain to process or work with. If you're generating any imagery as you listen, you're more responsible for that than I am. And as an author, I want to have authority, like a dictator, right? I want to control the image so I can control the impression. Here's a different way to handle Ted coming home. Ted stood between the couch and TV, raised a trembling fist at Marcia, and said, Is the bachelorette more important than us? Marcia eased off her wedding ring, set it on the coffee table, and used the remote to tap up the volume. That's different, right? I mean, we can tell, things are over between these two now. And that's what I'm shooting for there, the impact. Here's another example. My son Owen had a great time sledding. Versus, as he raced down the hill on his sled, my son Owen laughed with delight and his eyes sparkled with joy. In the first example, I'm allowing the reader to decide what the great time sledding really looks like. And there's times when that might be okay. In the second, though, I'm doing more showing than telling. Even here, if you take a look, right, and I hope some of you are a step ahead of me, you can see that I've got laughed with delight. Do I really need with delight there? Isn't that a kind of telling? It is. I'm not trusting the word laughed. Can you see the other example of this? I've got his eyes sparkled. Sparkled is a good word choice. Well, what do I need with joy for? It's extraneous. I'll talk about that more when I talk about word choice. What's really insidious about this temptation to tell is that we have that urge when what matters most, we want to tell people that. But you're reaching for the wrong tool. It's a jackhammer when you need a scalpel. For years I've given students this abstract sentence. The boy looked hurt. And I've asked them to improve it. Every semester, I get some A-plus student who tries to blow me away and impress me by working on something like this. The boy was obviously in excruciating pain, experiencing unimaginable torment and agony. Well, that sounds good, right? And I understand the impulse to head towards a thesaurus sometimes. But I don't think it really compares to something a little more direct and image-based, because that lovely sentence still doesn't really produce a sincere, precise image, does it? How about the boy had a screwdriver stuck in his eye? I'm guessing, and even hoping, that with the first two sentences here, you kind of shrug, right? And with the third, you kind of cringe. That's what I want, because that proves to me that you're feeling it. The reason for this is because our brains interpret vivid imagery, even when we know it's imaginary, as a kind of reality. Put another way, our minds don't entirely differentiate between something we actually see and crisp images in our brain, prompted by precise language. We react to both with our bodies. Author Daniel Kahneman, in his excellent book, Thinking Fast and Slow, illustrates this wonderfully in the following way. He's got that on a page, and then he goes on to explain this. A lot happened to you during the last second or two. You experienced some unpleasant images and memories. Your face twisted slightly in an expression of disgust, and you may have pushed this book imperceptibly farther away. Your heart rate increased, the hair on your arms rose a little, and your sweat glands were activated. In short, you responded to the disgusting words with an attenuated version of how you would react to the actual event. All this was completely automatic, beyond your control. You see, that human impulse right there is something that as a writer you can use. And I'd ask this question, would you really have any reaction if instead of banana and vomit, we just had that? No, of course not. The imagined reality generated by our brains when we're reading is automatically more hazy when we overtly tell readers information directly, whether through summary, interpretation, analysis, or generalization. I'm not arguing you'll never use these, but only that when you do so to convey crucial impressions, you're reaching for that wrong tool again. So a final example here. You could tell readers this. During his hike in the woods, Josh heard an alarming sound and was worried that a dangerous creature was nearby. I hope that by now you can see the examples of that overt telling and the dulling effect of it. And I would compare that with during his hike in the woods, Josh heard a rattle and imagined a coiled snake lurking in the leaves. Maybe the best way to wrap this up is to point out the obvious. The imagination, the clear film that runs in your head when you're reading, is only activated by images. Scour the world around you for the unique, striking central images that are all over. Slow down. That's what artistic writing does. It hits pause and invites us to imagine.